Okay, so here's the situation. You have two different audio recordings, one for each person who was part of an interview. So those are two separate audio files that we're going to combine, but we also want to add some background music and some other audio. So we're going to look at where we can find some background music. My favorite spot is Free Music Archive. There's a lot of different features in Free Music Archive that make it pretty easy to navigate. One thing is they have the genres, so you can look at just instrumental music. For background music, it's a good option. You can listen to any of the songs. It is a little bit difficult to search through. You have to listen a lot. You can't really go off the titles or the genres necessarily to find things that you like. So it is kind of a time-consuming process. I already found a song that I'm going to use. I like this one for a little bit of intro music. You can download it straight from here, but one thing that's important to keep in mind is you will want to find out what the usage rights are. And so not everything in Free Music Archive is going to be completely usable by you, and I'll have more details about that in the comments. But in this case, the license is a BY, so I have to give them attribution. I have to say who this is by, and then NC, so non-commercial. And since I'm not making any money off of this video, I'm okay. I can use this as long as I give Blue Dot Sessions attribution. And so what I'm going to do is go ahead and download this. And so if I click on the download on a Mac, I will also have to right click and then save audio as. Wait for my slow computer. I'm going to go ahead and close that. I'm going back to the creating audio software page. So there's Free Music Archive is a great spot for audio. There's other spots too. YouTube Audio Library is a good one. Searching Bandcamp, Vidvo, or I'm not sure how you pronounce that. They have a few options. You got to make sure that you're restricting it to just free clips though. If you want other kind of sounds like nature sounds, I want to have some kind of ambient sounds. My favorite is Sound Bible. Vidvo also has some good clips, but I'm going to show you about Sound Bible. Sound Bible has things broken down by subject, so I can just click on this to see a bunch of different animal sound options. Some of the more popular, more recent ones are going to show up on the sidebar here. There's new ones down here at the bottom, but I can just search. And so what I want to do is I want to look for some sounds of someone going on a hike. And so again, I can see license information right here. Public domain means I don't have to give any attribution. I can do whatever I want with the recording. I can make money off of it. I can change it, do whatever I want. So I always like to find public domain. I can listen to it right here. That seems pretty close to what I want. And so to download it, I just click on the title of it. There's a WAV file that I can download, or an MP3. WAV is generally a more, it's a format that's going to be usable in more different types of programs. But generally speaking, WAV and MP3 should both be pretty good. I'm going to grab the WAV file. So I've downloaded my hiking trail sound. I've downloaded my background music. I already have the recordings of my audio, and so for the interview. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and open up Audacity. It's free and open source, so it's one that I recommend to folks. Audacity is pretty easy to use. There's a lot of features that we're not going to cover, but for the things that we're going to cover today, you can learn how to do most of those pretty quickly. Hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have a good idea of how to do some of these things. It might take a little bit of trying to get it down. But first, what we're going to do is we're going to want to import our tracks, our different audio tracks into our project. And so we can do this just by opening the folder where they're located and then clicking on them and dragging them into the Audacity workspace. You can see now they're all loaded. There's a separate track for each different sound clip, so you can see each one is a different length. Each track is also a stereo track in this case, so you can see there's a left and a right channel for each track. So it looks like there's 8 separate tracks. Depending upon the audio that you import, you might have stereo or you might have mono. Both are fine. Stereo simply means that there might be a little bit different sound in the left-hand channel than in the right-hand channel. And so sometimes that's beneficial. But if you just see one channel for each track, that's fine. No need to panic. And so we can play through and listen to it by hitting the play button here. Hello everyone, and welcome to my podcast. Today I have a really... And right now we're hearing everything all together, and it's kind of annoying. There's a lot of things going on at the same time. And so one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start organizing. You can see we have the titles of the tracks here on the side. And so here we have Tim speaking. That's Tim's speaking part. And so I can move this up because that's the first thing I'm going to really focus on. So I can move it up along the cue by clicking on that little down arrow and moving it all the way to the top. And then you can see here I have Jim's speaking part, and in the beginning he doesn't really say anything until he gets introduced a little ways into the segment. And so I can kind of ignore that for now, and so I'm going to mute his track, so I'm not going to be able to hear it as we play through. So that's going to make things a little bit easier to focus on. But you can see here I have the clap at the beginning. That makes it so that we can sync it up later, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And so one thing that I want to talk about is being able to focus on the pieces that you want to. And there's a couple different features in Audacity for you to control that. And so if I want to just focus on these first two bits, the interviewer and the background music, I can go ahead and mute the other tracks. So I've already muted the interviewee. I can also mute that outdoor sound, that ambient noise. There's another feature though that also kind of enables you to isolate one track at a time. And so instead of muting individual tracks, I can choose the solo button. So now I have everything selected so I can hear it, but when I hit the solo button, I can only hear the one that I click the solo button on. And so that really lets you focus on just that one track. So it's kind of the opposite of the mute, but it's a very handy, quick way to just isolate one track that you want to listen to. So another useful tool when you're dealing with the playback is being able to skip around on different parts of the track. And so you can see if you just click on the timeline at the top, it'll move the playhead, but also you can use the space bar to stop or play the track. So if you ever want to stop it, just hit the space bar, and if you want to skip ahead, just go ahead and click anywhere on the timeline. There are also a few different tools at your disposal. So right now I'm on the selection tool. That's what's highlighted at the top there. And so when I click and drag, I can select areas of the audio track. If I double click, I can select the entire track. When I select anything and I hit the delete key, it just automatically deletes that. If I hit Control Z, it'll undo that. So I just delete and then Control Z. Another useful tool for controlling the volume really precisely is the envelope tool. And so here I'm going to click a couple dots, and those are just points where I'm going to change the levels. And so here you can see I have two different points. So at the beginning it starts out full volume, and then it tapers down to be a little bit quieter, and I can just control that by clicking and dragging the mouse. And so this will be nice. The music will start in loud in the podcast, and then as the person starts talking, it'll get a little bit quieter. And so I can kind of shift the placement of where the person starts talking to match up with this fade out, or fade down rather. The next tool we're going to look at is the time shift tool, this little double arrow here. And so this will allow us to place the speaker so that right when they start talking, right at the point where the volume of the music starts going down. And so here we can just visually line those up and then listen. Hello everyone, and welcome to my podcast. Today I have a really exciting interview with one of my close friends. And really this is a process of listening and kind of just being able to tell by ear whether or not the levels are going to be sufficient. So is the music quiet enough so that I can hear the speaker? Do I want to tweak it a little bit? And in this case I do. I want it a little bit quieter. And depending upon your setup and your track, sometimes getting it down to get really low can be tricky. And so you're going to want to change the size of how the tracks are displayed. So you can just drag the bottom part of the track itself, and then that gives you a little more granular precision on a really exciting interview with one of my close friends. And then it's really just a matter of making little micro adjustments. Really exciting interview with one of my close friends to try to see what you do or don't like. What is acceptable? Is this loud enough? Is it too loud? Can I hear the music at all anymore? You don't want the music so quiet that it's inaudible or that it's distracting, because people are trying to figure out what's going on, but you don't want it to be drowning out the narration. So now we're just going to listen to the entire beginning sequence. Hello everyone, and welcome to my podcast. And I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so now I have my levels pretty much how I want them. I I still have this kind of annoying clap in the very beginning, which we're still gonna use to sync up later, so I'm not gonna get rid of that yet, but something to keep in mind is just kind of making sure that you tweak everything so that it's set up to start playing exactly when you want it to. And speaking of that, I have this track of somebody hiking. It's just ambient noise of them hiking. And in the introduction, the interviewer talks about hiking. So I want to line those up so they happen at the same time. You know, last week I was out on a hike walking. And so I'm going to play it back until I hear that point where it says hiking. Walking through the forest. I'm going to make a note of where that happens on the timeline, right? So I want to, shift. I'm going to use the time shift tool to move that hiking sound right at that same point, about 15 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to have to switch from the envelope tool to the time shift tool. And you can see I have this little no icon, so the mouse cursor is a little no symbol. That means that I can't use it on any of these. That's because I didn't have my track stopped. I had it paused instead of stopped. Once it's stopped, then I can shift this to where I want it to be. And since I have track 1 way up high and track 3 pretty far down, one thing I can do is just make track 2 a little bit more narrow, or I can move track 3 all the way up, which is what I prefer to do. I like to just see them side by side. There's no real difference in whether in the order of the tracks they all will sound the same, so it's really just whatever your workflow preference is. Last week I was out on a hike walking through the forest, enjoying the sun in the air. Just try to get that exactly where I want it to be so it matches up with the narration, so it goes along with what the listener is going to be listening to. And I'm going to go back to the selection tool because now I want to select this track. The background noise was a little too loud, and so I'm going to just lower that. And instead of using the envelope tool, I'm going to use an effect. So there's a whole wide range of effects. There's a few things I want to do, maybe fade in, fade out. But just the overall volume, I'm going to play with the Amplify tool. The Amplify will let me either boost or reduce the volume for that track. So in this case, I'm just going to choose the amplification. I'm going to go -10 decibels. That's a pretty significant drop in volume. In the air and the birds in the trees, feeling the ground beneath the soles of my feet. So I'm pretty happy here with the volume of the background noise, but I noticed that the speaker gets quieter a little ways into it. So they started off talking a little bit louder, and then they got quieter once it went underway. Ground beneath the soles of my feet. I thought of one person. And so it's really kind of just battling against that background noise. So I don't want to reduce the background noise too far because then we won't be able to hear it. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to bring up the level of the narration. And so here we can see there's some low lows and some high peaks. And so I'm going to use a tool called the compressor, which is going to kind of even all those out. So all the peaks will be about the same level. I'm just going to go with the presets. I'm not going to change anything. Just click OK. And now you can see those peaks, those high peaks are all pretty much matched. There's a little more uniformity across the middle there as well. Feeling the ground beneath the soles of my feet, I thought of one person who's introduced me to so many wonderful spots. And that's quite a bit better. I like the levels quite a bit more. But I can use the Amplify tool to give it just a little bit more of a boost. So now that it's a more uniform, bring those peaks up a little bit more. I thought of one person who's introduced me to so many wonderful spots. And that is pretty close. That sounds really good. I can still hear the background quite well as the narration. But now I want to kind of tweak the background so that it really matches up to what the narrator is saying. So I want it to end right where the narrator ends. I want it to fade in so it doesn't have a sharp starting point, and I want it to fade out so it doesn't have a sharp ending point. And so I'm going to use those two tools. But one thing I haven't done yet is make sure that it's the length that I want it to. So I have it starting where I want it to start, but I haven't checked to see if it's going to end where I want it to end, right? And that's pretty important. We don't want the background noise to be going on when we've shifted to a different topic. So let's listen to that again. One person who's introduced me to so many wonderful spots, and he's here in the studio today to talk to me about. Okay, and so now when we're talking about the person coming into the studio, that's where we know we want that background noise to end. We only want that imagery to be when we're out on the hike. Once we come back to the studio, we're going to get rid of that background sound so that people understand we're back in the studio. So what I'm going to do now is just delete the last part, right? So I'll find the spot where I want to end, select it all, and then just hit the delete key. It's going to get rid of that last bit. And so now, though, I've lost my fade out, so I'm going to go ahead and select the end of it again and do my fade out effect. And so he's here in the studio today to talk to me about how he started his business, sharing wonderful areas like this, and a little insight. And that's a pretty perfect ending spot right there. I'm pretty happy with where that ends off. However, there's one other thing that I want to kind of tweak. So I've got 3 sounds competing here. I've got the ground beneath the soles of my feet. And I thought of one person who's introduced me to. I've got the background music, the hiking, and the narration, and it's a little bit much. That can, depending upon your personal preferences, that can be fine. But me personally, I want to really just go on this hike. I want this hike to be the only thing that the listener's thinking about. So I'm going to use my envelope tool again on the music, and I'm going to totally fade it down all the way so we can't hear it. And again, you can just kind of tweak, play around with that envelope tool and move those dots around, get the right amount of fade in, fade out there. In the trees, feeling the ground beneath the soles of my feet. And I thought of one person who's introduced me to so many wonderful. And now that has quite a different feel, right? I really like that. No sound, no music at all. Nothing other than person talking and the hike. And it really kind of takes the listener out of the studio onto the trail. And that's kind of what I'm hoping for in that moment. But I want to make sure that there's no music at all. So I'm going to solo that track and then listen to it again and make sure that there's no sound at all. Sure enough, it's perfectly quiet, so I'm pretty happy with that. And so now I'm going to listen to it all again together here. Let's see. And he's here in the studio today to talk to me about how he started his business, sharing wonderful areas like this, and a little insight into what he does on day to day. Jim, welcome to the podcast. And so now we have it fading out of the trail, back into the music, back into the studio, and then we need to sync up the interviewee with the interviewer. So I'm going to move the order of my tracks again. I got Jim all the way up here at the top, so Jim can be matched up with the interviewer. And so you can see here when he comes in, there's a bit of a lag from where it's supposed to be, and that's because at the beginning he started recording a bunch of dead air at the beginning, which is totally fine. That's better than starting halfway in or something. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to sync up these claps, and so I'm just going to use the time shift tool, delete the beginning of his track, line up those 2 lines there. We can see the clap there is that line, that long vertical line. Just visually line those up. It can be a little bit easier to line those up if I use the zoom in tool. So that's just a little magnifying glass, and I just click on that spot. And you can see here the claps are still a little bit off. So I'm going to go ahead and use the time shift tool. Yeah, there we go. And line those up just as perfectly as I can. And then I'm going to play it back and listen and see how closely those are synced. And that's pretty close. That's pretty perfect, You can kind of play around with this until you get it exactly how you want it to be. But for the most part, you can be a few milliseconds off and it'll sound fine. It's only if you can hear both people through one mic that it might cause some sort of problem. But if they're in 2 different cities or, 2 different rooms entirely, being a little bit off isn't going to make a huge difference. Jim, welcome to the podcast. Well, thank you for having me. So in this case, I'm pretty happy with that. You have the person coming in at an appropriate amount of time after the interviewer asked them a question. And so I like that. And one other thing, though, to think about is, do I want the background music playing throughout? So here I can say, sure, maybe I want the background music playing forever. Maybe I want to lower it a little bit. Maybe I want to totally fade it out. Maybe the background music is just for this kind of opening intro. And so once I get into the interview itself, then I want to fade the music out so we can just focus on the interview. Again, it's kind of personal preference. I'm going to get rid of this. And so one thing I can do is I could select that and I could delete it. I could just get rid of it entirely if I'm not going to use it again. There's not really there's not a lot of drawbacks to that. The only possible problem would be that maybe I want to come back to the music at the end. And so I'm going to just use the envelope tool to just fade it out. And so as Jim is starting to talk, I'm going to slowly fade it out. So when he says, "Thank you for having me," or whatever, the music is just slowly fading out. And so then their discussion starts, and there's no music, there's no trail sounds, there's nothing else other than just quiet studio. And again, you can kind of tweak this as you drag the little dot forward and backward along the timeline. It will change the length of that fade out. One thing you want to pay attention to, again, is making sure that you're listening to it so that it is dead air. And in this case, we don't hear anything to the podcast. Well, thank you for having me. Totally dead. So that's great. And now, obviously, if this was a longer project, a real project, these weren't just sample files, we'd have a much longer interview. But I'd have my intro nailed at this point, and assuming that my two speakers, their levels are right overall, which I can tweak with the Amplify. Maybe the interviewee, I'd want to compress all of his audio as well, so I could double click and compress that, amplify it a little bit. But otherwise, that should remain pretty easy. Once their conversation starts, I'm not going to be tweaking all these different things. So at this point, I'm pretty close to just being done. And since I just lowered the volume with the envelope tool of that background track, I can bring up that music again later, maybe in between segments or at the end. Another thing, though, that I want to cover real quick is how to kind of get rid of any mistakes. So let's just pretend this middle section here in the intro is something I want to delete out. I can just select it with the select tool, hit the delete key, and delete it. And I can do the same for part of the segment in the middle or the whole ending part. I can also select, and so I'm going to undo that, so get all the full track back. I can also select part of it and cut it out, and then I can move it to a different area or move a different segment rather than just deleting it. When I delete it, it just automatically goes all back together. Instead, with the cut tool, this little scissors here, I can cut it out, and then I have that saved to my clipboard, and then I can delete any part, or I can move that cut piece to a different section. So I'm going to delete the part that was the mistake, move my timeline, move my cursor to the point on the timeline where I want to then paste it in. And so now I have some dead air in the middle there. So in case my timings were important, I didn't want the piece just to be deleted out with no dead air in between. I can do that. The other thing, though, I want to do is I want to zoom in to make sure there's no noise at all. So in this case, there's that little tiny sound wave, so there's going to be a pop. So by zooming in, I can just delete any last little vestige of it. As long as you have a really good flat line there, that means it's pretty much all quiet. But another thing I might do is do a fade in or a fade out, just to kind of reduce any pops that might occur from cutting something out right in the middle. And then here I can time shift the whole piece there so that the interviewer and the interviewee are still lined up. So again, you want to think about the timings whenever you're deleting out. If you're cutting out a middle piece because you made a mistake or for whatever reason, you want to make sure that doesn't throw off the other timings with other people. And so that's the basics of Audacity. We looked at some of the tools, we looked at some of the effects. There's certainly a lot more that you can do with Audacity, but these are some of the basics that can get you started in creating a podcast. Check the notes. There's links to a lot of these different tools and to other tutorials, and check out the Creating Audio guide. There's a lot more links as well, including one that's a video tutorial on using Audacity in general. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Thanks.